My name is LoriZaumseil. Today is December the 6th, 2018, and I have some things I want to say. I was a dispatcher for the Anchorage Fire Department for 12 years. My last day in the dispatch center was August 18th, 2016. That was due to an event that occurred on August 6th, 2016. I was diagnosed with PTSD following that event, and I hoped that of all the things that came from that and happened because of that, first and foremost would be that other people who might have the same problem or issue would be helped because of it, and that people in a position and with a responsibility to be sure that help was available would in fact do that job and carry out that responsibility. After the incidents of the earthquake a week ago, it has brought up a lot of things for me. I've talked to people who are still my friends, and I actually still consider them my coworkers, who are suffering the after effects of that earthquake and what happened that day. So I want to speak as matter-of-factly and as straightforward as I can about what happened to me, the journey that I took. I'm going to try to be brief. Those who know me know that I have a hard time with that. I would like to say that I have this all lined out in my head and that it will all be in the right order and it will make perfect sense. I'll try. On August 2nd, I took a phone call that changed everything for me. What I want to say prior to that, for people in positions, even though you are part of the Muni, you're in charge of large parts of the Muni or different sections of the fire department, probably don't know my situation specifically. So I'll take just a minute to talk about myself for a second. I worked for the Anchorage Fire Department for 12 years. I came to the fire department with 5 years experience as a police and fire dispatcher from Fairfax County, Virginia. I was a trainer, a lead trainer. I had CISD training. I worked sort of informally as the crisis assistance coordinator in the Anchorage Fire Department. There are many people and families who can talk about the things I did and step forward to help them with. I always considered myself the rock in stressful situations. I think my coworkers would tell you that I was the one who would be the stone in the unbendable tree when terrible things happen in the dispatch center. Things that happened in the municipality of Anchorage between 2004 and 2016, some of the worst events that we experienced, chances are myself or any other fire dispatcher that you know had some part in that, because there aren't very many of us, anywhere from 10 to 20 depending on staffing. So we all see a good portion of the horrible things that happen in Anchorage. So I never thought that I would be somebody who would actually have an unresolvable issue from a call. I felt like I was the one who was going to be the one who recognized it in somebody else, the one who would be the rock for somebody who struggled. I always believed, and this is what makes me want to speak out now, because I think this is the most dangerous thing that existed, and it still exists, and I realize that now, and it's why I want to speak. I believed that even though we as dispatchers or firefighters, police officers, walked on a path that kept us close to an edge, that kept us Sometimes sliding off of that edge when things were hard or difficult. We took that call where a child was involved. Or that call that had some trigger because of our own personal life, and we slipped. For the most part, we could catch ourselves. Our coworkers would help us. We kind of got back up on that rocky path. But we always believed, because we always were told, that if something ever happened, if you just slipped so far that you couldn't help yourself, and that normal everyday ways to work out your own problems or resolve your stress or anxiety didn't work, that the fire department and the municipality would be there for you. TV, news programs, emails that we got, you would hear PTSD being spoken of as something that was on everybody's radar, that they were standing by to help with. In fact, just recently, I saw a video produced by the Stryker Stretcher Company that was sort of a PSA that talked about dispatchers, firefighters. Well, I'm not sure it talked about dispatchers, but firefighters and the stressful occupation that it is and how tough it is. And I saw Chief Hetrick speaking about how they were prepared and ready and had resources that they would bring to bear to help anybody who suffered a mental stress or injury, so that didn't become something that haunted them for all of their days. I would like to say that when my injury occurred at work, that Chief Hetrick was the one. She was deputy chief at the time, and she relieved me of duty. She was the one who came to the dispatch center when my coworkers recognized that I was struggling and something was wrong. It was Chief Hetrick who came to dispatch, who spoke to me. I told her at the time, I can't talk about this. I don't want to talk about this. I was still on duty. I was answering 911 calls. I realized something was wrong. I felt completely not in the right frame of mind. I felt like everything was sort of cracking around me. But I knew enough to know that I didn't want to talk about it right then, that I couldn't talk about it right then, that I was doing everything I could for it not to completely crumble. She insisted that we were going to talk about it. In fact, I did begin to crumble. There were only 3 of us on duty, and that is one thing I remember thinking, is that only 2 of us are answering phone calls, and I can't not be able to work, and I can't talk about this. She made a determination that I had in fact experienced something that was causing me not to be able to work. She directed that I be relieved of duty on that day, on August 2nd, 2016. I don't disagree with that decision. I wasn't capable. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't identify it. I couldn't understand it. It was beyond my comprehension that I couldn't just get myself together and keep working. So she ordered that I be relieved of duty. And then she left, and I was still on duty. I continued to answer 911 calls while my coworkers called in relief, tried to get a hold of people to come in and take my place at work, which did eventually happen. I remember looking at that phone as it rang, and I had to push that button and thinking, what if it's something I can't handle? What if I can't? I remember being terrified that I was going to fail in my duty. And then help came, and I went home. So this is already taking longer than I thought it would. So I have here just a small portion of the paperwork that happened after that day. When I was relieved of duty, I went home. My husband was at work. I was alternately hysterical, sleeping, almost catatonic. I wasn't sure, what to do. What I was feeling was nothing normal for me. I wasn't sure how to handle it. My coworker, who had been the acting lead on duty, who was wonderful and continued to be wonderful throughout all of this, called to check on me, and she told me that she had been advised by Chief Hetrick that if I wasn't able to come to work the next day, that I wouldn't be charged leave, and that, I could just take the day off work. And I thought, oh, it would be so okay. That would be such a relief to not feel like I have to get myself together to go to work. And so I asked her to go ahead and put me on leave for the next day. Just as an aside, I will say that I was charged leave for that day. Tiniest little issue. It was just the start, though, of things being handled that just seemed so wrong and inappropriate, and like nobody really knew what to do, and nobody was prepared. And I think that is really the whole basis of why I feel like so many things need to change, is that so many people in the municipality and the fire department, in their individual positions, from HR to the city attorney's office to command staff to supervisors in the fire department, sort of interpreted and determined what to do based on their own opinions and what they felt like. And there didn't seem to be any general oversight and making sure that processes were followed, or that there was a protocol, and people where there didn't seem to be a protocol or they weren't sure what to do. It just seemed like people made individual decisions, and one department didn't have any idea what the other department was doing. And so I just want to sort of go through that. Very early on, it was very hard for me to keep track of things and events, and people would ask me questions and I couldn't remember, or I'd have to, ask my husband. And so I started to kind of keep just a little journal of who I talked to or what I said or what they said, just because I was having such a hard time concentrating and I didn't know what to do. So I have a pretty thorough timeline, and I have paperwork. I actually have stacks and stacks of paperwork, but I want to just try to, if I can, I've already messed up my paperwork, go through what happened and why it shouldn't have happened, or I don't know, I guess I'll let you decide if it shouldn't have happened. And I just want to ask, why is it still happening? Why is there still not help? Why are we still telling people that the help will be there, that the resources will be brought to bear to help them, and it's not happening? And people depend on that, and people feel like they can walk on this path, and that if anything ever happens, that the help will be there, because that truly was the secondary trauma that made it impossible for me to even think about coming back to work. Because initially I thought, okay, I just need some time. I asked for a light duty assignment. Could I please just come and do some filing, do something so I could just get my sea legs under me? I was told absolutely not, because my workers' comp claim, well, okay, let me go back to that day, August 2nd. I was relieved of duty. Unbeknownst to me, the safety officer on duty was directed by Chief Hetrick to fill out a safety officer mental injury report, an on-duty accident report, so to speak. I was never consulted about that. I never spoke to the safety officer. He filed that report based on other people besides me. So I called into work the next day. The next day at about noon, I remember that I just knew I wasn't okay. I remember thinking, you have to admit to yourself that you need help, and it's time to ask for help. I have on my timeline here that I called the Employee Assistance Program. So the incident occurred on August 2nd, 2016. That was a Tuesday, I believe. The next day, noon or 1 o'clock, I called the Employee Assistance Program. It was an 800 number. Spoke to somebody in Chicago, explained the situation to her, crying, sobbing. It was hard for me to retell, but she asked me things like, do you feel suicidal? Are you going to hurt yourself? She was making a determination about whether this was a critical, acute situation. I told her that I, in fact, was not considering hurting myself. She told me she would put in a request for local assistance and that I would be getting a call back. That night, there was a phone message on my iPhone from Chief Mark Monfort. He was the communications director at the time. He oversaw dispatch. I texted him back. My husband and I were trying to have dinner, and I texted him back and said, if you need something specific, I can call you. Otherwise, I'm at dinner. That was August 3rd. I never heard from Chief Monfort again through all of this to this day. So the following day, and I'm going to refer to my paperwork here because I want to make sure I get it right. I called in sick again because that night after dinner, I started to get my uniform together, and I just remember completely losing it, picturing myself putting on the uniform and going to work the next day, and I just knew I was not going to be able to do it. So I called in sick for the next day, the night before, and then at some point in that day, I remember thinking, oh, this makes the third day that I have missed work. And I don't have a doctor's slip, and does this matter somehow? And I contacted work or contacted somebody and asked about that, and they told me, oh, well, a safety officer, an injury report has been made, which was news to me at that point. I said, okay. I still hadn't had a call back from the Employee Assistance Program. At that point, somebody who was a member of the peer support team said that they would reach out to Dr. Marie Bateman, who was the advisor for the peer support team for the fire department. She wasn't anybody that worked for the municipality. She didn't work for the fire department. She was just an advisor helping the peer support team get together. I said that would be fine. I didn't know what else to do. I was struggling. I was confused. She called me back that night, and again, I'm looking at my notes. She called back. I talked to her about it, and she and I made an appointment for August 10th. My husband and I had previous plans to leave for that weekend to go to Portland. He was running in a Spartan race with his daughter. I felt like, okay, let's do that. Let's get out of town. It was a horrible weekend. I struggled. I couldn't concentrate. I broke down at the race when I thought that my husband wasn't where he should be and he must be hurt. We went shopping in the gift shop, and I walked out with an armful of things that I didn't pay for. It was a terrible, terrible weekend. I got a call from EAP again that Friday saying they were sorry that they hadn't received a call back. It was the weekend. Was I still okay? And that they would try again Monday morning. So on Monday, I got another call from EAP saying that they still hadn't heard from a local provider. I still knew something was wrong. I didn't know what to do. She told me she would, let me see. She will send in another request and that should have a response in 3 to 5 business days. So on August 9th, which was Tuesday, or Monday, later that day, I can't remember. I spoke with Shannon Fuller, who is the workers' comp adjuster for the municipality of Anchorage. She needed a statement from me because of the safety officer's lost time accident mental injury report. She needed to do an interview with me. I see in my notes here that our conversation was 23 minutes long. 5 minutes of it was related to the actual event. Most of the call was asking about our schedule and dispatch, about short days, how short days worked, how recently it had been that we were not working short days or that we were working overtime on our short days. It seemed very bizarre to me. She did not have a lot of questions about the event itself. And also later that day, I got a call back finally from EAP giving me the name of a counselor that had responded to their request. At that point, I had an appointment with Dr. Bateman, so I told her I would wait. That appointment with Dr. Bateman ultimately got canceled. She was sick at work. I had a week off previously scheduled for that work week anyways. I felt like time off and some family time would be good. So on August 16th, I was due to work again. I came back to Anchorage on the 15th from our property on the Kenai Peninsula, and I started to just feel panic. And I thought, what am I going to do? I've been relieved of duty. I haven't seen a doctor. I don't know. I hadn't heard back from Shannon Fuller or anybody from the workers' comp division. I was certain that there was no way I could just go back to work. I didn't know what to do. I knew something was wrong. I felt like I didn't want other people to know that something was wrong. I needed to, because in my mind, I still kept telling myself, you are not this person. You can do this. You need to get past this. And so I drove into work. I remember pulling into the parking lot, just looking for the command staff vehicles, knowing that I was going to be met at the door and asked to go upstairs to a conference room, and I was terrified. And I walked in the door, and there was nothing. There was nobody. I had been relieved of duty. I hadn't found any help, even though I'd asked for it. I was confused and panicking, and I just walked in and I sat down at my console and I started to take 911 calls. And in my mind, I was thinking, it's not really happening. I don't know. This is nothing like I expected. Like, I wasn't sure what to do. Wasn't sure if I was doing right. I saw Chief Monfort come into work into the back room, and I began to have a panic attack again because I just knew that this was going to be the moment that he was going to call me back to the office, or something was going to happen at that point, and I was going to have answers to questions that I hadn't been able to answer for myself. But that didn't happen. It was several hours. Chief Montfort came into the dispatch center to speak to the lead on duty, the lead supervisor, and he walked in and put papers on her desk and walked out, and he didn't speak to me. And I began to think for the first time that I was rowing this boat all by myself, and I still felt like I was so far off that rocky ledge, and I felt like I was scrambling to get back up. And my coworkers were recognizing that something was wrong. The person working next to me that day hadn't been there on August 2nd, but he looked at me and said, "LZ, what's going on with you? Are you okay?" At one point, I hit the button to answer the phone, but my foot stepped on the radio pedal. And so what I meant to say over the telephone, I said over the radio channel. And it seems kind of silly and funny now, but I just remember thinking, I shouldn't be here, but I don't know what to do. I'm going to try to speed this up and do the condensed version. I was hoping the whole thing would take 10 minutes, but, so I had a 3-day work week that week. The second day, I was also on phones. I wasn't right. I was doing the best I could do. The third day, I was working the radios. I got called back to the office by Chief Mandavi, who was working in conjunction with Chief Monfort over dispatch. He told me that I had made a serious error the day before at work. I had made an error that caused a 1-hour delay in a patient being picked up and transported. I was mortified. I remember, and I have it in my notes here. What I wrote was that I couldn't even remember the event. He was describing it to me, and I couldn't even remember it from the day before, and I had no explanation for what had happened. The next day, I went and met with Dr. Bateman. She wasn't really able to see me as a patient, but because my husband is a veteran and she is a VA-sponsored doctor, she could see us as a couple. She told me then that I needed to get sleep, that I was never going to get my sea legs under me, so to speak, without sleep, and that I needed to see a doctor and I needed to get help. I told her I didn't know where to begin, and I remember her questioning me and saying, well, who, your employer surely has somebody for this. I mean, they relieved you of duty. Is there not a process or a procedure? And I said, not that I know of. One thing that had happened my first day back at work, I sent Shannon Fuller an email and I said, I don't know what's going on. And she sent me back an email saying that my claim had been denied, that the only way that they would consider a mental injury was under extraordinary and unusual circumstances, and that a 911 dispatcher taking a 911 call, there was nothing unusual or extraordinary about that. And so for those 3 days that I worked, I thought, okay, so I'm not injured. I have to be okay. I don't know what to do. Dr. Bateman was telling me that's not okay. They can't tell you that. You haven't even seen a doctor. How is somebody who talked to you on the phone for 20 minutes going to make the determination if you're okay or not? I didn't have answers for her. I didn't know what to do. There was no script for me to follow. I didn't know what to do. She gave me a recommendation of a couple doctors I could see. I called them. Each doctor I called, and I will say over the next several weeks, I think 4 to 5 weeks, I called many doctors. I tried to find, and each one either to the doctor or to their staff, or sometimes both, would retell the story and explain what happened and why I needed help and what kind of help I was getting. And each time there was a different reason why that wasn't going to work. They didn't take our insurance. They weren't willing to do a workers' comp potential claim, that their specialty was something other than PTSD, or, they were marriage counselors. On August 22nd, I got in touch with Bonnie Scarborough to verify that she had received my off work slip, because at the point that I couldn't find a doctor, I actually went into a walk-in clinic to see a doctor to say that it had been recommended that I needed help from a physician. I needed to sleep. I needed to not have to go to work. The doctor there was willing to do that for me after speaking with me and spending some time with me. So I contacted Bonnie. She agreed that I was going to be put on FMLA. I was off work until the 30th. I went back on the 23rd to see Dr. Bateman again. She just kept encouraging me that I needed to get help, that I needed to see a doctor, I needed to find somebody somehow. I finally was able to get in touch with my personal physician who had been on vacation. I went and spoke to her at length. We had a pretty long talk. I was extremely upset. She'd been my doctor for all the while I'd lived in Alaska, 12 years. She knows me. In fact, in that visit, she said, this is clearly work-related, that we are billing this to workers' comp. She walked out front with me to the front desk and advised them to not bill this to my insurance, but to send the bill to the municipality. And she told me again that I needed to seek a mental health professional, that while she felt very strongly about what was going on, that she was not the right doctor to treat me. There was a lot of calls and back and forth to make sure that forms had been received, that I was truly off duty, and all of this I was doing myself to make sure that I wasn't in telestaff, that I was truly off, that I wasn't going to be fired for being a no-call, no-show. Again, I was having to write everything down because I was so disjointed and confused and shattered. At some point, I was so upset about everything, and I remembered calling Shannon Fuller back again and said, how do I do this? Now, I've been to my personal physician at this point. She feels that truly my what's going on with me is a work-related injury, and can I somehow resubmit? And she tells me that she's received a bill from my personal doctor, that she sent another notice of refusal of controversion. She told me the Muni would not be considering this again, and that if I wanted to pursue it any further, to get a lawyer and contact the state board. At that point, I was pretty hysterical. I didn't know what to do. I remember being alone by myself in the parking lot, outside of Dr. Bateman's office. And I tried calling Chief Hetrick, and she wasn't working. At that point, Chief Boyd was standing in for her. I spoke to him. He has known me my whole career with the Anchorage Fire Department. I knew intuitively that that I couldn't really ask him to get involved, that that I needed to follow this somehow myself. He offered some suggestions for me out of concern. He and I had conversations before about line of duty death things and getting things in order and family crisis things, and he was very much in tune and sensitive to those kind of things, and he had some suggestions for me. In fact, he's the only member of command staff that ever did. And ultimately, I was able to sort of grab onto those suggestions and find help for myself. On September 6th, this is, the original incident happened on August 2nd. So at September 6th, I was still struggling. I didn't have a doctor. I didn't know what to do. So I called the workers' comp board. This was after another meeting with Dr. Bateman with my husband. And I was just beyond frustrated and beyond even being able to think anymore. I felt like my 17-year career as a dispatcher was just vaporizing. Where once I felt like I just want to go back until I could get steady, now I felt like I can never go back because there's no help. Because if I slip again, will I be able to catch myself? Like I didn't feel like I had even caught myself yet. And I felt like it just became this like second thing for me that how could I ever do this again, knowing that there's just nothing to help you when I hadn't heard from Chief Hedrick. I hadn't heard from Chief Monfort. I hadn't heard from my union. I hadn't heard from anybody other than my immediate coworkers who wanted to help, and God bless them, and they know who they are. And I don't even feel like I can name them because I feel like it would somehow mark them at this point. So September 2nd, I called the Workers' Comp Board to ask them how I could appeal my claim. And the person looked it up and told me that I didn't even have a claim. And I said, no, I do. I have a claim. I have 2 controversions to the claim. And he explained it to me then that what had happened wasn't that a claim had been filed, that it's simply a notice of injury that the municipality sends to them. And they make the decision in-house whether they agree or disagree that it is actually truly an injury. And if they disagree, that it's up to the employee to file the workers' comp claim. And that was news to me. 5 weeks after this had happened, I believed that a claim had been filed. I think there were even people in the process at the municipality who understood that that's how it worked, but it wasn't in fact. The only thing the muni does is file a notice of incident. They approve it or controvert it. Mine was controverted, and that was the end of it. Until I started asking questions. So I have my safety officer injury report here. That was all filled out that day. Actually, the report date is August 3rd. So that was hard. That was really hard to think that I am 5 weeks after what happened. I still don't have help. I don't know what to do. The very thought of even walking into the dispatch center is giving me panic attacks at that point. So on September 11th that year, there was a windstorm, and just briefly I'll say that I was working on the day of the windstorm in 2012, and looking back after all this time now and in some therapy and talking to friends and my husband, I realized that windstorm was probably the first crack in the armor for me. There were 4 of us and a probationary employee on duty that night, and the calls started to come in, and it was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I had worked 9/11 at the Pentagon when I worked in Fairfax County, and this was far more stressful. Calls piled up, and there's a sound, a bonking noise that happens when there are 911 calls holding. And we heard that board bonking for 4 hours, and there were anywhere from 10 to 20 calls continuously, 911 calls backed up, that we had no idea if those people were reporting a tree down or a child not breathing or a vehicle in a pond or a house fire. We worked as hard as we could, as fast as we could, typing, answering, talking. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. Altamani was the director of the dispatch center at that time. He came into the dispatch center. He sat next to me. I was working the main channel radio and did basically nothing. We had an extra dispatcher console available. He didn't call in anybody to help us. It was horrible. We felt completely like we were out on a limb, the 5 of us on duty. And then at some point, 4 hours into it, the wind died down, the calls died down, and the decision was made just to cancel the remaining 50 calls on our screen that we had worked to process. And anyways, so there was another windstorm on September 11, 2016. I was so anxious. I was calling people in dispatch trying to tell them, don't forget this, don't forget that, make sure this, make sure that. It was crazy. But on September 13th, I had a doctor's appointment. By that point, after I was told by the Workers' Compensation Board that I didn't really have a claim and that I had to file a claim myself, I felt like I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this. I sort of went through the phone book and called workers' compensation attorneys. Like, I need somebody to help me do this. I spoke to an attorney who ultimately ended up representing me. I was hysterical. I was sobbing. I couldn't speak. I couldn't formulate sentences. He was very taken aback, and he said, whoa, wait. Before we even talk about this, are you getting help? Have you? And I got even more hysterical. I said, I tried. I don't know what to do. I can't. And he said, well, your employer must have somebody. There must be a protocol in place. Like, he was like the 10th person to say that to me. And I just came unglued. I said, there's nothing. There is nothing. And so he recommended a doctor to me, who ultimately became my doctor and who still helps me. So the help I ultimately got was from an attorney. I work for the Municipality of Anchorage Fire Department. I was a member of the IAF 1264 union, and the help I got came from a lawyer. On September 13th, I had an appointment with that doctor. And that morning, I got a call from one of the safety officers who was going off duty, and he and the oncoming safety officer had a meeting with Chief Hetrick, who apparently had just been notified that my leave was almost gone, and there was a topic of leave donations and whether Chief Hetrick wanted to know if I would accept leave donations. And she was advised by one of the safety officers that they were quite certain I would say no. There was a policy in place that employees had to okay that. He told her he was pretty certain I would not be okay with leave donations. And he told me so on the way home. He said, I just want to double check. I don't want to speak for you. And I said, absolutely not. In fact, as I wrote here, what I wrote was, absolutely not. That will be stressful and humiliating and add pressure that I just have to come back whether I'm well or not. And I'm not ready to talk about all this to everyone who will ask. I said, I don't want to tell a bitter story or spread a negative story. It would just create a negative world around me. I said, absolutely not. He said, that's what I said. That's what I was pretty sure you would say. So, okay, I just wanted to make sure. As I was sitting in the doctor's office that day, and I was early, and I looked at my iPhone and I looked at my Muni email, and there was an email that had gone out to all employees asking for leave for me. I think that was the moment when I really felt like not only is nobody helping me, but this is all about covering liability for themselves, or it was so hard to understand it because why wouldn't I just ask? And I called the person I had spoken to that morning, and I was hysterical, and he said, I knew you would think that I betrayed you, and I didn't. I said, I don't think you did. I know you didn't. And he said, I'm going to call Chief Hetrick and tell her that you're really upset. And I said, okay, because I'm really upset. And she called me. I I don't think I made sense for the first couple minutes on the phone to her. She just kept saying, listen to me, you just have to listen to me. This is what I wrote down. Her words, I'm begging and imploring you to let everyone do this for me, to take care of me. I tell her I don't want my coworkers carrying this, that I believe that this is for the department to make right, and I'm willing to, that I want to shoulder this myself, that I don't want to feel like somebody else is handling this. And she tells me, and this is what I wrote, that she thinks eventually the workman's comp will be reversed and their leave and mine will be returned. But it will take some work on my part, and that I'll likely have to get a lawyer. And I tell her that I'd already contacted a lawyer. I hadn't spoken to him really yet. And she told me that if he needed anything at all, to give him her phone number, that she would help. I tell her at that point that I really feel like a pariah, like the command staff has ignored me. I feel like that there's some general edict that nobody should talk to me, that I had become this liability somehow. I also then contacted headquarters and asked for a meeting with the chief, and it was Chief LeBlanc at the time. I was so upset about the leave thing. Protocol, Muni regulations say that the employee has to sign for it and agree to it. And so I got a meeting with the chief, maybe the next day. I sat down at his office. I spoke. I unloaded my heart. I probably spoke for 20 minutes without taking a breath before he said anything. The first thing he said to me was, is it your intention to sue the municipality of Anchorage? I said, no. I talked to a lawyer to help me do the workers' comp thing, and he said, okay. And then he told me that he had signed the leave donation form because Chief Hetrick had informed him that I could not be reached. I had spoke to multiple people, multiple times. There are probably no fewer than 10 people in the municipality that had been in contact with me. No attempts were ever made to reach me regarding donated leave. In fact, that very morning, like I said, the topic had come up, and she had been informed by people who had been in contact with me that they were certain I would not want that. And yet that happened. So somebody suggested to me, I hadn't thought about it, that, well, when something happens, if you're injured and it's not a workers' comp claim, then your disability insurance. And I thought, oh, well, there's a way I can, make up for my lost wages and maybe try to keep people from using up leave or needing to use donated leave. So I filled out the form, the disability form. That's here somewhere too. That was ultimately denied within several days because they said that anything that occurred or was exacerbated by work did not qualify as a disability. So I was told by the Muni it wasn't work-related injury, and I was told by disability that it was a work-related injury. That was another total meltdown for me. And on the day that we'd had the conversation about the donated leave, Chief Hetrick said to me, you just call anytime. If I can help you, you call. And so I just remember picking up my phone and just hitting call back and being on the couch and being by myself and just saying, okay, I'm calling. Like, I don't know what to do. I'm at my wit's end and I don't know what to do. And she apologized to me. She told me that she had failed me, that she would do anything she could to help me. I said, well, I guess I'm trying to appeal this workers' comp denial, or at that point I still didn't know exactly what I was doing, and asked her, I said, you told me that if the lawyer needed anything, that you would help. And so, can you help? I don't even know what to do. She emailed me later that day, this email that says, on Tuesday, August 2nd, 2016, at approximately 15:30, I was requested to report to AFD Dispatch. It was reported to me that dispatcher LoriZaumseil was having a strong emotional reaction to an emergency call that she managed earlier in the day. Dispatcher Zaumseil appeared to be struggling with performing her assigned tasks due to a reaction from a previous emergency call. She was in obvious distress and questioning if she had provided the correct instructions to the caller. She also seemed to be very reluctant to answer any more 911 calls at that point. She stated to me, "I don't know if I can push that button." My experience with dispatcher Zaumseil has been that she is very professional in her abilities, and I have never known her to react in such a manner. Her reactions demonstrated to me that she was not able to perform her job and needed an opportunity to take a break and work through her feelings about the incident. Battalion Chief Dennis instructed the lead dispatcher to call in a relief dispatcher, and when that person arrived, dispatcher Zaumseil was relieved of duty and sent home. Again, when Chief Hetrick left dispatch, I was still on duty answering 911 calls, but I was eventually relieved of duty. On November 3rd, by that time, I had spoken with the attorney. He had agreed to take the case to help me with the workers' comp. So then I got this email from the municipality of Anchorage with all their requests, and it's the most stressful, horrible path to walk when you're walking it by yourself. And and I don't mean by myself. My husband was wonderful, my coworkers were wonderful, but there was nobody that I worked for was trying to help me or get me back to work. Or it just seemed like the second that I got up from that chair that day, that I just became a liability. And so one of the things that was said in that November 3rd letter after my August 2nd event was, the municipality may be able to provide temporary light duty or alternative work for the employee until she is able to return to work as a dispatcher. Please indicate if the employee would like to consider this. And I just remember it was just another moment when I was like, that's all I wanted, right? Like 2 months previous, that's what I wanted. Can you just help me? And I was told no at that time. And now it was 2 months later, and just the very idea of going back in there, like the secondary trauma of the whole, I just couldn't do it. And it seems ridiculous, and I kept telling myself it was ridiculous, but I felt like if anything happens, there is no help. So that was the letter from the municipality on November 3rd. And then, I don't know if you know this, but when you have a workers' comp claim, you basically have no, you just sort of become this autopsy subject where people are just able to do whatever they can do and find whatever they can find to try to impugn your character, your integrity, in any way that they can. And I felt like for 12 years I had just so believed in what I was doing and who I was working for. One of the things that the municipality wanted was to know if provide copies of any notes, journals, emails, or text messages to and or from the employee to any person related to the August 2nd incident. And I thought, they're going to go after everybody I know, everybody I worked with, anybody who has called me or texted me support, or my own private journals were subject to, I don't write a journal, but I mean, if I had, I just couldn't believe it was the most, it was distressful. And they also wanted to know any major life stressors or experiences, including but not limited to loss of a loved one, major personal illness, illness of a loved one, any significant financial events such as bankruptcy or loss of a job, or any other life experiences where the employee directly experienced a traumatic event or learned of a traumatic event that occurred to a close family member or close friend. And it was such a hard thing to realize that it was just going to be this digging, let's find one thing, anything. Never was there help, never was there, we want you to be okay and come back to work because for 12 years you've been an asset to this department. Even though that was promised, even though that was the impression that everybody had, and I believe everybody working still has, it just became this hunt for any way to discredit me. Had to sign the release for all my medical records going back to May 7th of 2010, including but not limited to medical benefit records. This is an insurance release for 6 years. They could see everything. I needed to sign that. So that request on November 3rd was, could I work light duty? What about that now? So my doctor, the lawyer contacted my doctor. He said no. Lori and I have talked about this. It's, she can't do it. It's not going to happen. I won't release her for that. And yet, while I was in protected status, while I was on leave, the city attorney's office directly contacted my doctor several weeks later. I was out of town. I got a call from my doctor directly saying, did you change your mind? Have you talked to the Muni? What's going on? Why are you considering going back to work on light duty? I said, I'm not. This letter was from the municipality. It was a fax, I believe. I represent the employer in the above referenced claim. I know you have not released the employee back to work as a dispatcher. However, the Anchorage Fire Department tries to provide light duty work while an employee is recovering from a claimed work-related injury. The fire department usually has positions for administrative help, such as data entry. So again, they're asking, it just felt like pressure, like a threat, like I have to do this or I'm fired. This is, do you think it would be in Ms. Zaumseil's best interest to return in some form of less stressful work? My doctor answered no. And this is one of those instances where I feel like if the HR department understood that the city attorney's office was contacting an employee who was on protected status, it's not okay. It's not okay. I believe the state law, the regulations surrounding that say that the only thing that can be asked of a doctor are clarifying questions, and those have to go through the patient first. I don't know. I'm not sure about the law. I can tell you how it affected me. Ultimately, after I was scheduled for depositions and video depositions, which ended up not happening, the city proposed a settlement. They offered a settlement to end my employment with them. My lawyer helped work that out. I will say that at some point along the way, one of the union e-board members and somebody from the peer support crisis team did sit down with me. I told them my story. I had my case files. It was pretty far into it at that point. They expressed their sympathy that it had been so hard. E-board member asked for a meeting with Chief Hetrick, met with her, called me after that meeting and said, you have a lawyer, right? And I said, yes. And he said, I think that's going to be the path you need to go. No resources were ever offered from the union for me. Even though I think the IAFF stands strong about assisting members in matters of PTSD and help. And again, I say, I just feel like I could have come back to work. I wanted to come back to work. I just needed, if only, it was like suddenly it had all been laid bare to me. Everything that anybody ever said about work-related mental health injuries or stress, or that it was all bogus and it was all a facade. And once I knew that, it just created this wall that I just felt backed up against with no way to get over. And so there was a settlement, there was a compromise and release. There's so many individual details, things that happened the day after my settlement, and I was separated from the Muni. An email went around telling everybody that I was released for full duty because it was the last day of my doctor's excuse, I guess. Part of the compromise and release was that I have that here somewhere. That I would be able to continue seeing my doctor for 2 years. So long as it was necessary to treat the PTSD. And it's right here. I have it highlighted. The parties agree that the payment will continue for 2 years. As long as they are medically necessary and related to the employee's injury as determined by Dr. Wolf, who is my doctor. Well, 6 months into, maybe 6 months after, maybe a little more, I got a call from Dr. Wolf himself, and he said, the last 3 months of your office visits haven't been paid, and it's because the municipality is demanding to see the chart notes, the personal individual notes from my visits with him. And I said, well, that's not okay. Nobody needs to see that. And he said, well, we've been refusing to send them, and they're refusing to pay, and we're getting some bills stacked up, and I hate to ask you to get involved, but can you? So I immediately called the doctor's billing office to verify with her. I asked her who had sent this request suddenly, that it wasn't good enough to have a code that said I was being seen for PTSD, that suddenly they needed to receive the chart notes. She told me at that time it was Richard Degenhardt, who was my workers' comp claim adjuster. And I remember saying to her, no, that's not his job. That's not who he is. He's been involved in this case, but he's not my workers' comp claim adjuster. And she said, well, that's what it says here. So I called the municipal, I'm not sure who I called at that point, but so Richard Degenhardt started out as the legal aid for the municipal attorney's office who opposed my claim in this from the beginning. He was part of the settlement and rectifying bills, sometimes in not such nice tone in his email. And then he switched jobs, and he went to the workers' comp division, the HR division, and he became my workers' comp adjuster. And that's when suddenly bills were refused unless chart notes were made available. And I came to find out that my chart notes had been, in a short period of time, Dr. Wolf's billing office had released the chart notes, believing that they had no choice. So these were sent to Mr. Degenhart, to some insurance consultant. Anyways, it was pretty devastating after I felt like all of this was finally behind me, that they might as well have been sitting in the room with me, with my doctor. I complained. I wrote a pretty extensive email where I included the city manager and the head of HR, Mr. Degenhart's boss, the city attorney, explaining that I felt like this was not okay, this was inappropriate. 9 minutes after I hit send on that email, Mr. Degenhart responded to me, fired off a response, told me he certainly was entitled to that information. And 30 minutes later, sent a second email, had some more to say about that. I wrote back and said I did not accept that answer and that I was going to be pursuing this further. On March 1st of 2018, this past year, I received an email from, who is this? This is Monica Elkington, who is assistant municipal attorney who had taken over for the previous attorney who had been opposing my case. She told me she had reviewed the compromise release. She had reviewed the emails with Mr. Degenhart. She believed that everybody was acting as within their rights. However, she did offer $5,000 if I wanted to just go ahead and call it a day, and the Muni wouldn't have to pay any more bills and I wouldn't have to provide any more chart notes. I said no thank you. I did not believe that wasn't about money to begin with. It was just about the way that this whole path had been tread. So a couple other things I have here. Some of the things, my settlement was March 2017. So here's a check before my settlement, but after I had run out of leave, for $0.00, because that's helpful when you're out of leave and your workers' comp claim is being denied. There's another one from January of 2017, $0.00. And there's yet a third one, all of which were mailed to me. So many things were not okay in this, more than I have listed here, believe it or not, as long as this has been. I'd be happy to talk to anybody. I'd be happy to share my files with anybody. Here's the thing. There was just a huge event in this city beyond what the windstorm was in 2012. Incomprehensible to me is that all 4 of the people that I worked with that day in the windstorm were on duty for the earthquake. That was on Friday, last Friday. half the dispatchers were in the main dispatch center, half responded to open the backup center. The new director of dispatch, I guess, was out of town. My understanding is he tried to call, but didn't come make contact for 48 hours. Nobody heard from him. Decisions were being made that should have been at his level, I'm guessing. I don't know. That stuff is beyond me. But the very idea that the person in charge of dispatch didn't come to check on his dispatchers. And my understanding is when he did come on Sunday, he went to the EOC upstairs and talked to department heads and people, and the dispatchers who were downstairs working in the basement in a windowless room with very little ventilation and a serious mouse infestation. He didn't even go into the room and ask them if they were okay. Apparently one of the battalion chiefs on duty did check on the dispatchers Friday, bought food for all of them at his own expense, or I don't know, but made sure that everybody had something to eat. On Monday, when the new communications director finally did come to work and meet his dispatchers face to face and asked if they needed anything, they told him they could use some paper plates at this, backup dispatch center. And he told them that his municipal spending card had been shut off and he wasn't able to spend any money. Couldn't even buy paper plates out of his own pocket, even. Apparently, Chief Hetrick sent an email on Sunday because she had been reminded by the peer support group that people might need help. And so she sent an email to say that Aetna was providing free counseling, and that if anybody in the fire department had friends or neighbors who might need counseling, that they could share that information with them and to give a call to somebody on the peer support team if they had something they needed to talk about. And apparently a similar email came from the president of the union. Again, here, shared some links that were available on social media. And here's the thing, I get it. Firefighters, police officers, just everybody in public safety had a horrible day. But everybody seems to discount, maybe not everybody, but there seems to be this feeling that what dispatchers do doesn't even come close to the struggle that a firefighter would have on the front line. And I say, it does come close, it equals, it may be different. As a firefighter, I know there was no rest. They went from one call to the next, to the next, to the next, handling one call at a time, exhausting physically. But there were dispatchers in there handling 20 calls at a time and watching calls they couldn't answer and not even being able to get up out of their chairs and wondering if there was a cardiac arrest or a structure fire or what that call was, the next one and the next one and the next one, for hours upon hours upon hours, responsible for and feeling like if only they could go a little faster, type a little faster, and wondering what was happening and hearing people and listening to that board bonk and feeling like they were alone, right? Where was their leader? They had each other? And that's what I have to say is the most dangerous thing, is that as dispatchers or firefighters or anybody in this municipality who believes that they will give all and risk walking the edge of that path, because if they slip, they believe, because they've been told, that there is help, and there is not. And I challenge Chief Hetrick, what she said in the video from Stryker, that all the resources would be brought to bear for anyone who suffers injury from the stress or the mental. I would ask her to show what resources were brought to bear for me, and I would challenge her to show me what resources were brought to bear for dispatchers who worked through the earthquake. And I go so far as to say I don't believe there are any. There's still not a plan in place. There's still not somebody, that a doctor that an employee could go to when they don't know who to go to. Prove me wrong. I hope you can.